I don't know. It was here when I got here.
Wow, this is a big crowd. Biggest class I'm gonna, the title of my talk is A Fine Middle Class Neighborhood. And it's about Prospect Hill where I live. And you can't hear, right?
There you go.
How am I doing now? Thank you. Prospect Hill dates from 1893. Members of the Showers and Woolery families platted 43 lots on 18 acres adjoining the southern boundary of the city of Bloomington. The first house appeared in 1897 on the corner of 3rd and Rogers. By 1910, the Prospect Hill addition was all built out. With few exceptions, the neighborhood remains as it was in 1910. This is 3rd and College in 1907. And I just want to point out a few of the things to you if I can find myself here. Okay.
Here, Skip.
Here we go.
Here, Skip.
This was time
Skip.
speak into the mic.
Mr. Sturbaum, you need the microphone.
That was Tom O'Daniel Ford. Let me get over here where we can. That's Tom O'Daniel Ford when I came here. And I remember the ramp going from the first floor to the second. And it wasn't until just recently that I found that that had been a Ford assembly plant. So that's why the ramp is there. The parts must have been shipped in by rail.
Yes.
And then assembled there at this building and then distributed through the community. Which one?
Oh, here, I'll move it. Hang on.
Okay, good. Is that mine?
That's my phone. Kelly,
No, it's just
reach up there and grab my phone. Because it's going to run my battery out.
Yeah, sooner or later.
You want mine?
Are we ready?
Yeah.
Mine's full. You want mine?
Yeah, you get yours charged a lot easier and get mine charged.
No, I'm going to need 2 hands. Okay,
Mike, you need a light.
this is our high school, Central High School. It's made of brick, that's why it's darkened. It has no electricity. It's hooked up to this company right here. This is the Indiana Lighting and Gas Company. It makes acetylene gas. It burns a carload of coal every day, and it not only makes the acetylene gas that goes into the houses, but it also heats the water that goes into the radiators that people around the area have. This is the Fullwider Lumber Company, and it was to fail during the Great Depression. Anyway, just an idea of what we were beginning to see. This is an oil tank, a gas tank, and it was still here in 1963 when we came.
Still there.
And I grew up in Cleveland, and in 1944, there was one of these tanks that the East Ohio Gas Company decided to put liquid gas in.
Ooh.
And it leaked, went into the sewer system and blew up. It killed 140 people. It was hard to get the actual death toll until much later because the heat was so great, it vaporized them. It destroyed a whole neighborhood. And so here we come to Bloomington in 1963, and there is one of those tanks just down the hill. I thought, well, I didn't have anything to worry about. It was downhill. It wasn't going to come up and get me. But that wouldn't have been the case. Once it got in the sewers, it was in the sewers. Local industries were steam powered. There was no electricity then. And their tall smokestacks, such as the one at the Johnson Creamery, carried off all the smoke. Houses are heated by coal. And there's a railroad. There's a lot of smoke and soot. I show this picture of the Beeline before it was built, and to show you how close the houses were to the railroad. This street was Morton Street now, but at that time it was Railroad Street. It was made. Am I still going on this? Is it too loud?
No. We can hardly hear you.
Oh, okay. We're going to see if that. I'd like it'd be nice to have them here.
Would you like a light, Mr. Sturbaum?
Can you get one?
Well,
Here, hang on a second.
here,
Oh wait, they're going to plug something.
Kelly.
Oh, you got one.
Yeah, but I can plug that in.
Oh, he's gonna plug that in?
Very long.
Oh, much better.
Then we'll be able to.
Yeah, we got electricity here.
No tall
Did that
smokestack
work?
necessary.
We're
You got a
steam
light
powered.
Thanks, George.
Yeah, thank you. It was Railroad Street until 1876, when we celebrated the nation's centennial, and the legislature changed it to Morton Street to honor our Civil War Governor, Oliver Morton.
That mic has to be right in your mouth.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, you have to eat it.
Right here?
Yeah.
All right.
Yay!
Our family came here in 1963. We sold our house in Anderson and asked the realtor to find us one in Bloomington. He showed us nothing on the west side. We rented a duplex at East 11th and sublet the other half to a group of young men. They had a band, and we learned the songs of the Beatles through the thin walls of our apartment. A former resident remembered Prospect Hill as a fine middle-class neighborhood when he lived here in the 20s. But the years and the Great Depression had not been kind. The unemployment rate in southern Indiana communities was 50%. Some of the houses became rentals, and people doubled up in others. Their value declined more when the banking industry spurred a movement to the suburbs by offering low down payments and long-term loans. The house we found had been vacant for 2 years. The neighbors referred to it as the White Elephant. Our house stood on a hill overlooking 3rd Street. It had a parlor, a living room, a dining room, a kitchen, and a half bath on the 1st floor, and 3 large bedrooms and a full bath on the 2nd. 2 of the houses on the block were in disrepair, and the 3rd house nearby was crumbling. The neighborhood didn't matter to us much then. We had no idea we would stay so long. We moved in, all 7 of us, and straightened up the place. The neighbors were happy to see someone move in, especially a family with children. I taught at Bloomington High and then at South for the next years. In 1968, Larry Reed, the superintendent, left to take over the schools in Utica, New York. He offered me a job in the administration. The offer was a good one, and the pay was right. But after looking at the city, I decided that Utica was not a place where I wanted my family to live and grow up. We would stay in Bloomington. Then our neighborhood began to change. Ola Mae Bartlett, who lived next door, decided to move to an apartment. She did not want to sell her house to an investor who cared only for its rents and not for the neighborhood. We felt the same way. We bought her house. Gene Weaver, who lived across the street, decided to retire to Florida. When he learned we had bought Ola's house, he asked us to buy his. When the house to the west of us became empty, we noticed candlelight there at night and found evidence of drug use. We bought that house rather than have it burn a burned ruin as a neighbor. Helen Irwin, who lived across the alley, lived next to an investor-owned rental. The tenant tied her dog to a tree and fed it by throwing cans of dog food to it. The cans littered the yard, and her two boys used the tall grass in the back to care for bodily needs. And Helen had had enough. She bought it and offered me a contract with nothing down, provided I clean up the place and rent to good people. When Roy Rush's father died and he decided to move, we bought his house. It was like Monopoly. We owned 5 of the 8 houses on the block. We bought on contract. Bank loans required large down payments, so city people sold on contract when they could. I don't remember any of our contracts costing more than $500. This was also a period when city planners nationally decided that a city should be designed to move traffic to benefit those who live in the suburbs. They began to build highways and overpasses that spread cars out of the city. These freeways plowed through downtown neighborhoods, dividing them and destroying the historic housing that stood in their way. There was opposition to this practice. Historic preservation became an issue, and under the Johnson administration, the federal government enacted laws and appropriated money to support it. Prospect Hill had historic houses to preserve, and the city had an organization, Bloomington Restorations Incorporated, to do the job. BRI saved the Paris Dunning house. Who is Paris Dunning? He was a leader of the Democrats who favored union with the South, but strongly opposed freeing the slaves. He is the only person to occupy the 4 major leadership positions in state government. He was president of the Senate, Speaker of the House, Lieutenant Governor, and Governor. He was a prominent defense attorney, an opponent of Governor Morton, and a former trustee of Indiana University. Saving the Dunning house started a new interest in Prospect Hill. People began to move in. We guarded against investors who would have no interest in the neighborhood other than money. We kept a list of houses that might come on the market and a list of people who were interested in moving to Prospect Hill. Later, we published a website that brought new homeowners from out of state. When people tried to convert houses for commercial use, we opposed them. The final battle for the neighborhood was the proposal to make West 3rd an east-west thoroughfare. Such a project would split the neighborhood and destroy all the housing on the Perry Township side of 3rd Street. We learned that if Prospect Hill were a historic district, a feasibility study would be necessary before any federal funds could be spent on the project. We decided to gain historic designation. BRI helped by raising money for a survey of our historic properties. And supported by the survey, Prospect Hill became the city's first historic district in 1991. With historic district designation came responsibilities. We had to establish guidelines for the buildings. Neighborhood issues needed to be aired. There was work to be done. We formed the Prospect Hill Neighborhood Association. We organized by areas. A member of the organization who lived there represented each area. These block captains reported to the organization at its monthly meetings. We published a newsletter which included articles about the history of Prospect Hill. We discussed city government and what we considered its favoritism for the East Side. Our meetings were organized. Everyone had a chance to speak. We followed Robert's rules, and we tried to limit our meeting to 1 hour. My son Chris learned his skill as a carpenter by helping me to repair old houses. He had tried his hand as a teacher following his graduation from Wabash. He discovered it was not for him. He founded Golden Hands Construction. He became active in the community and was appointed to the city's Historic Preservation Committee. And when the committee received criticism because of decisions affected development proposals while not being elected officials, Chris decided to become one. He campaigned for and won a seat on the city council. We had a city administration under Mayor Tommy Allison that supported neighborhood development. A group of neighborhood leaders met twice a month with the mayor for an hour on Friday morning. We brought to the mayor concerns that we had and issues that needed action, and she had answers for us at the next meeting. Our neighborhood's organized. They formed an organization called CONA, the Council of Neighborhood Associations. CONA met monthly and shared neighborhood problems and successes. The city sent CONA representatives to a 5-state conference of neighborhood associations where they learned how neighborhood organizations from surrounding states handled their problems. These were the days of failed low-income housing projects such as Cabrini Green in Chicago. These neighbors had real problems. We learned that motion sensor lights on alleys cut back on drug dealing, and that in Springfield, Ohio, the city leveled rundown housing, leaving empty lots. And one volunteer told about how she had bought her own riding mower and mowed those empty lots. Better an empty lot than a rundown house. In Fort Wayne, when the city removed houses, they pushed the rubble into the old basement. After a few rains, the lots were no longer level. We met some strong neighborhood leaders in these conferences. I'm going to show you some houses. They date from about the 1860s. Their design is functional. The walls are solid brick. And when the Monon came through, their owners wanted to be close to the means of transportation. The Monon was the major north-south railroad during the Civil War. This house at the corner of 7th and Rogers is rumored to have served as a hospital. It was close to the tracks and could have served such a purpose. Governor Morton, aware of the opposition to his support of the Emancipation Proclamation, requested that all Indiana troops be sent home in time for the '64 election. The generals opposed such a plan and countered with an agreement to send home the injured troops from Indiana. It's possible that during the trip home, troops were deposited at this house. Morton did not need the extra votes. He won a re-election by a large majority. This house was abandoned and surrounded by small shops when we came to town. Bill Cook restored it to serve as headquarters for Cook Financial. In earlier days, the house was called the Monon Blue, and its girls serviced the patrons of the levee. The levee was a rough area. Two of its taverns, Rod 400 Club and the Sunset Tavern, still operated when our family came to town. 3 men who disappeared one night after winning at poker at Rod's 400 were found years later when low water at Lake Monroe exposed the top of their red car. This is the Parris-Dunning house. Dunning opposed Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and led a walkout of the state legislature to prevent Governor Morton from passing a budget. Morton borrowed $1 million in an unsecured loan from banker James Lanier to run the state. Morton needed neither a budget nor a legislature. John Lehman, who used to deliver our Courier Journal, told me that his grandfather told of meeting at the Dunning house to go bear hunting. John was a neighborhood character who delivered papers and owned a number of rental properties on the west side. One day during the late 60s, I asked if he could change a 20 that he collected for the paper. He pulled out a wad of bills and commented that in the Great Society, even the paper boy had money. The Parris-Dunning house was in shambles when Rosemary Miller, president of Bloomington Restorations, decided to restore it. She borrowed funds from the historic landmark of Indiana, rounded up a group of volunteers, got help from the city, stabilized the exterior of the house, and then sold it to a group of doctors from Florida who wanted to take advantage of the federal tax credit. 5 years later, the credits had run out. A group of lawyers bought the house, finished the interior, and made it their office building.
Huh.
The restoration of the Parrots Dunning house was the rebirth of Prospect Hill. The house was there to be seen when straddling 3rd Street as you slowed down to make the turn at Jackson. It commanded attention. People saw the neighborhood in a new light. This is a farmhouse on the 300 block of South Maple. It dates from around 1870. The original entrance faced the Whitehall Pike, which is now 3rd Street. A newspaper of the period reported the suicide of a man who lived along the pike. The report noted that the man was despondent because of the assessment he owed. Would changing the front of this house to Maple have been a way to avoid assessment? This is the first house built on Prospect Hill. An early newspaper clipping announced that the boom was on Prospect Hill with the building of this house in 1897. Its owner was a superintendent of the stone quarry on Howe Street. John Nichols was the architect. Something about John Nichols. John Nichols published in 1902 a book of house designs and comments about cellars and other things of that sort. And many of those houses that were in his book are the ones that I'm going to show you along Roger Street. Another thing is about the architecture. Up till now, houses, for the most part, were purely functional. The houses along Morton Street were brick. Parrots Dunning house was solid brick. This house was a different house. It was one of John Nichols' designs. It was more than a half-century old when our family moved here. It had fallen into the hands of one who had little appreciation for its architecture. She cut the house into 5 apartments, built a kitchen atop the front porch, excavated the side yard so she could park a trailer there. The city had no zoning ordinance then, but somehow it stopped the trailer. There were drugs, and it is rumored that the city's first case of infectious hepatitis came from that house. A young man who had been living in the neighborhood hallways and porches hanged himself in the basement by looping a rope over a sewer pipe and relaxing his knees. A large tree of heaven fronted the house when an owner hired a painter to apply a coat of green paint over the old white siding. When fall came and the leaves fell, the outline of the tree in white showed up on the green house. Bloomington Restorations helped save the house. It supplied an interest-free construction loan for repair. The mortgage came from a woman's investment club. The house now stands proudly at the entrance of Prospect Hill. Standing next door is an example of John Nichols' creativity. How do you keep a house warm using one coal-fired fireplace? Nichols' solution was to curtail the use of walls. The living area of this house stretches its full width. Curtains can be drawn over the end rooms for privacy and unfurled to let the fireplace warm them. Nichols liked the design so well that he used it on his own house. This house has been carefully and tastefully restored. It is high-end housing. Even the barn has been restored. It's a big barn with room for both a horse and a carriage. The house is on the market. Its asking price is $425,000. Wood Wiles, the founder of Wiles Drugstore on the Square, built this house in 1900. Travel moved more slowly then when houses like this were built, and the architect added features that were meant to be admired. The 5 wreaths that are not simply painted down. And the front porch is much wider. It's designed to give the impression of a much larger house than this one. Notice the tree. Thomas Sayre, a prominent lawyer, built this house in 1906. The bay window and its interior floor plan indicate that this is a John Nichols design. City water had not yet come to Prospect Hill. Houses had cisterns that collected rainwater. John Nichols commented on cisterns in his 1902 book. He wrote, "3 things are all that is necessary to supply a family with the best and purest water in the world for drinking, cooking, and washing purposes. A well-constructed cistern, a clean roof, and a rainfall." But, he warned, let no summer's month's rain run off into the cistern. Those who did were in danger of the summer complaint. Another neighbor explained that the summer complaint came to those who failed to clean out their cistern during the summer.
Get a head on you.
This is the Rogers home on the southwest corner of Smith and Rogers. The house dates from 1906. It's a large house and housed a large family. Part of that family was Ralph Rogers. Anyone in the construction industry is familiar with stone and lumber purchased from Rogers Lumber and Rogers Stone. This house is 515 West 3rd, the house we moved into in 1964 and lived in for the next 40 years. We bought it for $9,000. The 2 evergreens were planted by Mickey and Sarah Burke in 1907 when they moved in. The hot water that heated the house's radiators came from the Central Indiana Lighting, and until 1919 when such service ended. The house was a Montgomery Ward kit home. Its 1907 listed price was $1,047. The water heating system cost an additional $204. Plumbing was $82.50, and a acetylene lighting system was available at an optional cost. The pipes that fed the gas lights in the house were still there in 1964. This was an expensive house in 1907. Mickey was a conductor on the Monon, and Gene Weaver, who worked for the Illinois Central, told me that Mickey made $35 a week. Gene said that the engineer made $2 for the trip to Louisville and paid a quarter for the bed when he had to stay overnight. Jess Fullwider built this house. He was connected to the Fullwider Lumber Company. The Sanborn map of 1907 shows a Victorian-style tower on the right side of the house as you're looking at it. The house went through some major modernization in the 20s. This is a house we were afraid would burn. We found candles and a burnt spoon on the floor beside it. The previous owner planned to cut the house into 3 apartments, but never finished and left the house vacant. This is Helen Irwin's house. Helen said that it was the first brick veneer home built in Bloomington. Those houses along Morton Street were solid brick, as is the Paris Dunning. Brick veneer was brick over a frame structure. Helen knew a lot about building. She'd been the Fullwider Lumber Company office manager. One Saturday, while I was getting a haircut at Charlie Franklin's barber shop, I overheard Paul Bender talking to another man about Helen Irwin. Both men had a high regard for her work in the lumber business. Helen's college degree had been in business administration, an unusual choice for a woman in the 1920s. A tinsmith built the house and shingled it with tin, a protection from fire, but a problem to keep paint on because as the sun heated the tin, it expanded and cracked the paint. I spent time with a heat gun peeling off the remains of various paint jobs. Red lead had been the original paint, but lead-based paint was outlawed by the 70s. I found that zinc oxide could hold the paint and prime the tin before painting again. Helen, her husband, Bill, and I spent happy times every month when I went to pay the mortgage on the house I bought from them. They were good storytellers, and I was a good listener. Helen told me of running a clothing store in Brownsburg during the 20s. She said that every salesman who visited had to come into their back room to taste their scotch. This was during Prohibition. I asked Helen where she got the scotch, and she replied, but it was medicinal alcohol that she bought in Jasper. She flavored it with powder from a packet. I wonder how many calls her salesman got in. Helen's father, Walter, was the postmaster. He was tubercular. The family built a shed behind the house where he slept. No heat in the shed. He took his meals with the family, and after dinner, all the dishes were scalded and put away, and Walter went to his shed. And the shed is still here. Right back there is the shed. And the idea was that if you had tuberculosis, fresh air was the best cure. And Walter got his share. Helen pointed out that Prospect Hill had been developed without sewer, water, sidewalks, or paved streets. Our sidewalks came in 1938 and were made of cut limestone blocks. They were laid by WPA workers. The WPA did a lot for Bloomington. The walls on Rose Hill Cemetery are WPA. Cascades Park and the limestone buildings that stand there are WPA. The walls along the street at Fairview School and the Banneker School on 7th were built by the WPA. A sewage disposal plant, our first, in fact, and sanitary sewers on on parts of West 3rd and the paving of West 3rd were WPA projects. The maple trees along Rogers and Jackson were planted by the CCC. The federal government had tents and other military equipment left over from World War I. It organized along military lines companies of young unemployed inner city men to work on the environment. They earned $30 a month, of which $25 was sent home to their parents. They built parks, roads, bridges, planted trees, and enriched the nation with their work. Our CCC company, the 520